Well, I guess we're starting all over again. Again. So, as you guys probably read last week, I have had to start over again, literally. Now, if you're out of the loop, then you can check out this post up here because I really don't want to talk about it. We're here, we're gonna grind through it, and we're gonna paint something new and interesting today, okay? So, our Discord member Ash asked if someone could break down how to paint clothing, especially folds and seams in fabric. Now, as your resident fairy godmother, I'm here to bippity boppity boo up a tutorial for you. Now, we could sit here and go over all the different kinds of folds and how to render all the different kinds of fabric, but that's a little dry and there are people out there who can teach you it a lot better than I can. I am purely here to fuel your impatience. So instead today I want to share with you my 3 super easy hacks on how to paint clothing that will make your character art look professional in no time at all. If you enjoyed this video, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe because I promise you'll enjoy all the other videos on this channel. And if you'd like to support me personally, then please come check out my Patreon, the link is in the video description. Alrighty, here are my 3 ultimate hacks to painting clothing. As you can see, I'm actually painting the bulk of this piece in Krita. Mostly because Ruffles Thompson over on Discord said since I'm having to start over, why not just switch everything up like the brushes I use? And that got me thinking, I've been meaning to switch to Krita anyway, might as well start now. However, for the bits in this tutorial specifically, as well as the finishing steps for this painting, I'm actually going to be using Photoshop just because it's a familiar workspace, so I kind of know what I'm doing. So first I'm going to show you each hack on a blank white square canvas, and then I'll show you how you can apply it to a full illustration. And I've arranged these to get progressively more advanced, with tip 3 being a witchcraft tier hack. Alright, let's go. So here's how we normally paint folds in clothing. We sketch out the areas of ambient occlusion one by one and then blend them into the highlight and then have to repeat the process as we map out each individual fold. As you can guess, this is like the bulk of painting fabric folds, is this process of sketching and defining, then blending out, then defining some more. Here's a life hack I recently discovered and it will save you so much painting time. Instead of sketching and painting the defined shadows, just paint the entire thing in a flat shadow tone. I'm just using the fill bucket tool to paint in a rectangle for now. Then we're going to create a layer mask, and with an airbrush we're going to pick a black tone and we're actually going to carve in some highlights. You're essentially painting the folds backwards, focusing more on the center of each fold that pops out of the shadows rather than painting the shadows themselves that go into the fabric. Plus, this allows you to broaden the shapes and cause some of the highlights to merge together. So instead of loads of tiny shapes, they form fewer larger shapes, which is always great from a design perspective. The best part, you can make the folds tighter without doing much more painting. Literally all you need to do is switch to the transform tool, turn on the resize controls and squash the fold inwards. And because we're doing all of this on a mask, A, you're only really transforming the mask and leaving the actual shadow layer untouched, and B, you're always painting inside the lines because really you're not adding any color at all. Now, when it comes to applying this hack to a painting, there is one additional prep step you're going to have to take. Instead of starting with a flat shadow tone, you're actually going to start by flatting in a mid-tone color. And if you know where your light is going to hit, you can also airbrush in some highlights in those areas. Then we're going to make a new layer on top of this and clip it to the mid-tone layer. This new layer is where we flatten the shadow and create a layer mask and then do the airbrush highlight trick. And honestly, this is why I switched to Photoshop, because we already know how convoluted the layer mask function is in Krita, although I am definitely getting more familiar with it, so there's that. Also, I want to mention you're probably going to have to refine all the shading as you would while painting the folds in anyway, but like I said, the bulk of the painting process tends to be about mapping in those shadows. By eliminating that step completely, you're essentially halving your painting time when it comes to the folds. So here's what we have after step 1. Okay, that was our beginner hack. Let's go intermediate and talk about photo textures. If you've watched me paint, you know I love adding photo textures to my character's clothing because in just a few clicks it adds like a million details to the fabric without actually painting any of it by hand. And I like to do this in 2 layers. First we're gonna find texture, then we're gonna find pattern. So let's hop on the internet and look for some royalty-free fabric textures. DeviantArt is an excellent resource for this. The one I've downloaded for today is this pack by Fudge Graphics. We're gonna pick a texture for our folds we've painted and we're gonna paste it in and clip it to the paint layer. And you want the texture to apply to the layer underneath rather than have a solid flat PNG overlay. So we're gonna change the blending mode of this layer. I generally go for either soft light or overlay because they make the texture visible without being overpowering. And if your texture layer has a very strong color, you can always desaturate it and mess with the levels adjustment until you like how it looks. Now this is where you need to apply your understanding of form. Because we have folds, the texture is going to form around these folds, right? So we're going to have to warp this texture around the folds that we've painted. I always like to create a copy before warping just to preserve the original and then start to warp the duplicate. You want to stretch the texture around the highlight areas and squash it into the shadowy areas of the creases. If you have multiple folds, this means doing a lot of warp work. And when it's all warped, here's an extra little tip to make the texture actually look believable. You want to mask out the entire layer by creating a layer mask and painting the whole thing black. Then with a soft airbrush, we're going to grab a white and paint that texture back in, mostly sticking to the highlight mid-tone areas. Because fabric tends to be quite matte, unlike with hair, here you'll actually see texture in the brightest areas because there is little to no specularity. So let's apply this to the painting. We're going to start by pasting in the texture, clipping it to the layer underneath and changing the blending mode. A lot of the times I find that warping really shrinks the texture and can never cover the entire fabric, so I generally copy the texture at least 4 times and create like a giant sheet of texture before I start to warp it. And once we have it nice and form-fitting, we're going to get rid of the layer using a mask and then with an airbrush only paint back in the brighter areas. So that was step 1 of texturing. Now let's look at applying some patterns to this fabric. Ideally you want to look for a transparent pattern that has really sharp edges. It's best if it's a vector because you can resize it without it looking pixelated, but honestly for most paintings a simple transparent PNG is just fine. Again, we're gonna hop onto DeviantArt and grab a free to use pattern. This one is by Jojo OJ and it's their Antique Cover Book 2 set. We're gonna do this pretty much exactly like we did the photo texture, so we're gonna clip it to the fabric painting, change the blending mode if needed, although I didn't need to here, and warp the pattern the way we did the texture. So it's gonna stretch around the highlighted bits and squash into the shadows. Again, we're gonna do the mask out, mask in thing, though this time we can be a little more liberal with the white, because even in the shadow, fabric pattern is gonna be visible because it's usually stamped into the color of the fabric. But here's an extra little trick that I like to do. Once I have the mask done, I go back to the layer itself and lock transparency. I then grab a low saturation dark gold-y color, set the brush to multiply and add in some shadows in the highlight areas. I then set the brush to color dodge and gently brush in some super vivid bands of light just where the key light would hit, but ideally in some of the shadows of the fabric. And do you see how it instantly makes it look like a metallic embroidered type pattern rather than just a printed overlay? So let's now apply this step to the fabric as well, pasting in the transparency transparent pattern, maybe duplicating it a few times to create a larger sheet of it, and we're going to clip this to the fabric underneath and warp it to fit the form of the fabric, stretching in the highlights and squashing in the shadows. However, if you have fabric that is oriented in different directions, you're going to want to do this in sections. So here, for instance, both his arms bend in directions that don't go with the straight top to bottom patterns of the torso. So you'll see me do this pattern in sections and rotate each section to match the orientation of the fabric and then warp it to fit the form. When we have it all oriented correctly, we mask out the whole layer with black and brush in the texture in selective areas with white. And finally, we lock the transparency, grab an airbrush and set it to multiply, add in some shadows within the pattern, and then we switch to color dodge, and with a dark unsaturated gold tone, we throw in some bands of light just where the key light would hit directly. And boom, the guy is now wearing an expensive fabric. Here's what it looks like after step 2. Alright, let's get really advanced now. We're gonna add some stitch detail to really finish up the entire fabric. Now you could find stitch brushes online, but I want to show you how to make your own fully customized. I'm starting with a blank 2K white square. You'll rarely need a stitch brush to be bigger than this. We're going to create a new layer, start with a simple rectangle and fill it in with black. Then with the circular marquee tool, we're going to create a circle at the upper edge of the rectangle to be the same width as the rectangle and be only half above the upper edge of it. Next, I'm going to duplicate this layer, flip it vertically and merge it down so we have a long oval. I also like to soften out the sides and the top of it just to make it a little more blendy. This is your basic initial alpha. If you're feeling ambitious, you can build in some form by making it look like a tube rather than a flat oval. Just add some highlight like you would in a cylinder. We're going to go to edit and define brush preset. Let's save this as pre-stitch. Now we're going to tinker with the dynamics in the brush setting menu. First off, I want this stamped so that one shape follows the next like a running stitch. So I'm going to tinker with the spacing until it looks like a stitch in the brush preview. You might need to adjust the angle as well, so just keep that in mind. Next, I want to make sure it follows the angle of painting, so I'm going to go into shape dynamics. Here I want the angle to follow direction and have no jitter whatsoever. I also want a tiny bit of pressure size dynamic, so I'm going to set the size control to pen pressure but have a pretty high minimum size. Plus, I want a little bit of pressure opacity, so I'm going to go ahead and add that in the transfer submenu. So now when we test run the brush, this is what we have, a neat little running stitch. I'm gonna save this as a new preset and let's now create some seams. So I generally want to add the seam to where the sleeves meet the shoulder and around the neck area, basically anywhere the fabric will be folded in to neaten the edge up. Again, this is a tiny detail, but it serves an important purpose. When someone's looking at your painting, the goal is to keep them engaged in it. And with digital art, a lot of the times people are gonna zoom in to see the little details that you've thrown in. Adding stitches to your fabric is like adding texture to your hair. It's a little Easter egg for your viewer to find, and it makes them realize just how much attention you give to the little details. Pretty cool, huh? So let me switch back to Krita and tell you about this painting. This is the 6th installment in the Light Astrology series, Virgo. Virgo is a mutable earth sign symbolic of fertility, harvest, and purity. It is represented by the Virgin, but contrary to popular understanding, rather than a misogynistic sense of purity, the term virgin here refers to the idea of being self-contained. Virgo does not need an outside influence in order to create new life. It is fully capable of crafting entire worlds with its own bare hands. In this scene, you see Virgo as a gentle nurturer, tending to a unicorn, possibly the gentlest creature known to any mythology. Even as day turns to night, his priority is to ensure the health and safety of all life in his care, as he selflessly gives of his love and energy. Here is Virgo, the compassionate. So I hope this video has helped you guys figure out some quick ways to punch up your character costume design. I'm thinking we can have a part 2 where I can show you how to really design your character's outfit to match their personality and such. If that's something you're interested in, then please let me know in the comments below and I'll make it happen. Thanks so much again to Ash for putting out the general bat signal for this video. I hope it's been exactly what you've been looking for. As always, if you guys have enjoyed this video, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe. We're on the way to 5k and I would love to have you there. Come join the Discord and the Patreon, links are in the video description if you want to grab some exclusive content on there. Alright, I'm gonna go rebuild my YouTube editing library because my current hard drive is just completely blank. So with that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more videos up here and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!